The wrong man took the empty groom's chair. "Don't cry for him yet, little saint," the mafia boss said, his voice low enough to feel private and cruel at once. Men only disappear from their own engagement dinners when they've already sold something. Tonight, it was you. Sofia Bellini was 24, a pastry chef with sugar burns on her wrists and a family who treated softness like a flaw. At her own engagement dinner, she had already learned exactly how cheaply the people who raised her could price her. In 2 minutes, Matteo Caruso would sit where her fiancé should have been and make an entire room forget how to breathe. In 2 hours, Sofia would leave with him under armed escort, wearing an engagement ring that suddenly meant nothing. The recipe book hidden under the flour bins in her kitchen, the one her dead brother left behind, would either save Matteo's empire or destroy every last person at that table. And before the night was over, Sofia would understand the most dangerous truth of all. The man everyone feared had noticed the one mercy she could not stop giving. Chapter 1. The empty chair. He sat where my fiancé should have been. My mother said it while the second course was being cleared. With her wineglass poised halfway to her mouth, and a smile so thin it made her look sharpened. "Nobody would marry you if Paolo had any sense," she said. "Be grateful he enjoys being admired." The table laughed, not everyone. My father looked down at his plate with the fixed concentration of a coward pretending to be tired. Paolo's mother made a little humming sound into her champagne. Paolo himself was 23 minutes late to his own engagement dinner, and still somehow the least embarrassing person in the room. I sat very straight beneath the chandelier and kept my hands in my lap. That was how I survived my mother. Stillness. If I moved too fast, she saw feeling. If she saw feeling, she pressed harder. The Bellini dining room in our restaurant had been closed to the public for the occasion. Heavy cream drapes, gold sconces, white roses that smelled too sweet under the food. I had plated the desserts myself that afternoon because Paolo's mother had rejected the pastry chef we usually used. "Too rustic," she had said, as if kindness had a texture she could taste. I knew exactly what waited in the kitchen below us. 12 dark chocolate tarts glazed so smoothly they reflected the lights, candied orange peel on top. Sugar so thin it would crack under a fork with a clean little sound. That was the sort of thing I was good at. Delicate damage. The doors opened. No one announced him. No one needed to. The first thing I heard was a soft metallic click. A lighter, not the frantic cheap flick of somebody needing a cigarette. Something slower, controlled. A sound made by a hand that never shook. Conversation died in layers. My father looked up. Paolo's mother lost color first. One of the waiters, already nervous, turned too fast with a tray of crystal flutes and clipped the doorframe. Glass shattered over marble. The man who entered did not flinch. Matteo Caruso was taller than I expected, broader too, dressed in a black suit that fit him without trying to impress anyone. Dark hair brushed back, face cut from calm in all the wrong ways, not handsome in the ordinary sense. Worse, the kind of face people built myths around because they needed somewhere to put their fear. 3 men came in behind him. Armed, silent, the waiter hissed. A shard had opened his palm. Nobody moved. I did. I was out of my chair before I thought about it. I reached the boy first, ignoring my mother's sharp inhale, and took his wrist. Blood welled bright against his white cuff. He could not have been older than 19. "It's all right," I said, though his eyes were fixed over my shoulder now, not on me. "Give me the napkin," he fumbled. I pulled the linen from my lap instead. Ivory silk, monogrammed with the Bellini crest for the dinner, absurdly expensive and suddenly soaked red at the center as I wrapped his hand. "It wasn't his fault," I said to the room, though I do not know why I said it. Perhaps because silence felt like consent. Perhaps because everyone else was already offering him up. The room stayed silent. Then I felt it, not touch, attention. I looked up. Matteo Caruso was watching me, not the blood, not the broken glass. Me. His lighter turned once between his fingers. Click. Something cold slid down my back. He crossed the room at an unhurried pace that made everybody else's breathing feel disorderly. One of his men bent, checked the broken glass, and hauled the tray away. Another closed the doors behind them with a softness that was somehow worse than a slam. Matteo stopped at the head of the table. At Paolo's empty chair, he looked at my mother first. "You were saying something?" Her lips parted. Nothing came out. Then he looked at me. His eyes were very dark. Not blank, that would have been easier. They held too much thought. "Sit down, little saint," he said. The name landed like an insult or a claim. I could not tell which, and that frightened me more than if he had barked an order. I helped the waiter toward the sideboard, nodded at another server to take him downstairs to the kitchen, and only then returned to my seat. My pulse was too fast. I hated that he could probably see it in my throat. Matteo drew Paolo's chair back and sat in it. The scrape of wood across marble sounded indecently loud. My father found his voice first. "Mr. Caruso, there must be some misunderstanding." "No," Matteo said. "There is." His voice was low, unforced. He did not need volume. The whole room leaned toward him anyway. "Paolo Visconti won't be coming," he said. My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" He looked at me then, and something in his face shifted. Not softness. Recognition, maybe, of a problem. Of an inconvenience that had unexpectedly become specific. "He left the city 40 minutes ago," Matteo said. "With money that belonged to me, information that did not, and the belief that your family would keep me patient." My mother made a quick sound. "This has nothing to do with Sophia." Matteo's gaze slid to her. "Everything men do with money eventually has something to do with women like your daughter." I should have hated him for that. I did a little, but I hated more that he sounded as if he were stating whether, not cruelty. My father reached for his glass and knocked it slightly off-center. "We can discuss repayment." "We are," Matteo said. My father stared. Matteo reached into his jacket and set a folded document on the tablecloth between the bread plates and the flowers. My father looked at it and went gray. I knew that look. Not confusion, recognition. My skin went cold. "Papa." He did not look at me. "What is it?" I asked. Nobody answered. Matteo did, because apparently mercy was not required for him to be honest. "Your father guaranteed Paolo's arrangement with Bellini Shipping." The room narrowed around me. "My father owns Bellini Shipping." "Barely," Matteo said. My mother snapped. "You have no right to come into our home. This isn't your home." His eyes moved once across the room. "It's a restaurant with locked books and frightened staff." It was so accurate I almost flinched. My father wiped his forehead. "Give me until morning." Matteo's lighter clicked again. "No." I realized then that nobody at the table was surprised he had come, only that he had come tonight. My humiliation had not interrupted business. It had been scheduled around it. I looked at my father. "What did you do?" "Sophia," my mother said sharply, "this is not your concern." I laughed once. I could not help it. A tiny cracked sound. "Apparently it is." Matteo watched that too. He pushed the document closer to my father. "Paolo is running because he was paid to move my shipping schedules to the Bratva through your routes. He believed marrying your daughter would secure continued access." My face burned so violently I thought I might be sick. Not because Paolo did not love me. That had been a smaller grief, older and duller. Because I had not even been cheated as a person, only utilized as an opening in a wall. "No," my mother whispered, but it was not denial. It was calculation collapsing. I turned to her. "You knew." She did not answer quickly enough. That was answer enough. The silence after that was different, not shocked anymore. Sealed, Matteo stood. Everyone else did too, except me. I had no command left in my knees. "Until Paolo is found and the rest of what was taken is recovered," he said. "Sophia comes with me." My father lurched up. "Absolutely not." Matteo looked at him with the kind of stillness that made men realize they had confused sound for power. "It was either that," he said, "or I collect in ways your wife will enjoy even less." My mother's hand flew to her pearls. I stared at him. "You can't mean that." He met my eyes. "I don't say things I do mean." There should have been shouting, resistance. Somebody should have called the police, though in rooms like ours that was always theater. Instead, there was only the faint scent of my blood-stained napkin still on my fingers, and the click of his lighter as he snapped it shut and tucked it away. Then he did something worse than threaten me. He held out his hand, not rough, not kind, certain. Behind him, armed men waited. Around me, my family did not move, not one of them. That was when I understood the shape of the night. Not that he was taking me, that no one here was going to stop him. I stood because my legs remembered how. My mother said my name once, but only because other people were in the room. I did not take Mateo's hand. I walked beside him anyway. The doors closed behind us. Chapter 2, The Locked Wing. His house had rules, so did his silence. The city looked wrong from the back seat of Mateo Caruso's car. Chicago had always made sense to me through kitchen windows. Steam-fogged glass, delivery trucks at dawn, neon reflected in rainwater by the curb outside Bellini. From Mateo's town car, the city was all black glass and slick streets and intersections that seemed to part before us. No one spoke for the first 15 minutes. Mateo sat opposite me, not beside me, in the rear-facing seat built into the partitioned cabin. His knees were apart slightly. One hand rested on his thigh. The other turned that silver lighter over once, then stilled. He hadn't lit a cigarette all evening. I started to think the lighter was not for smoking at all, just a metronome for judgment. I kept my hands folded so he would not see them shake. The blood on my fingers had dried in the creases. "I'd like to wash my hands," I said eventually. "You will?" The answer was so calm, it took me a second to realize it was not permission. I looked at the man beside the driver through the glass partition. Broad shoulders, shaved neck, profile like a broken Roman coin. He caught me looking and grinned. "Good evening," he said through the crack in the partition. "I'm Nico." "I'm very sorry about your engagement. On the bright side, the fish looked terrible." Mateo did not look up. "Drive." "I'm not driving," Nico said mildly. "I'm providing emotional support and tactical excellence." The actual driver, a severe man I had not been introduced to, did not react. Despite everything, a startled breath escaped me. Not a laugh. Close enough that Nico noticed. He put a hand to his chest. "There, I've done it. I've brought joy into a hostage situation." "I am not a hostage," I said automatically. Mateo's eyes lifted to mine. "Not if you behave." Heat rushed into my face. Anger, not shame, I told myself, though my pulse did not seem to understand the difference. Nico sighed theatrically. "He says things like that and people wonder why I have acid reflux." Mateo ignored him. "Your father signed over temporary custodial authority pending settlement." I stared. "You're lying." He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and passed me a folded copy of the document from the table. My father's signature cut across the bottom. Legal language swam. Protective supervision, material witness, asset preservation, I could barely see. "He signed me over." "He signed access," Mateo said. "I chose restraint." The car went very quiet. I turned toward the window because if I looked at him, I might do something stupid, like cry or hit him. And I did not want to do either in front of men, whose shoes probably cost more than my monthly rent would have if I had ever been allowed to live anywhere, but above the restaurant. After a moment, Nico spoke again, softer this time. "For what it's worth, Signorina Bellini, if the boss had wanted to frighten you, he would have sent 3 more cars." "Thank you," I said. "That is strangely not comforting." "That's fair." We drove north. Mateo's house was not what I expected. Not an absurd palace with gates shaped like family crests, though there were gates, and they opened fast enough to tell me someone had been watching our approach for a while. The house itself sat behind stone walls and bare winter hedges overlooking the lake. All old money bones and modern glass additions. A place that had learned how to survive by refusing to explain itself. Inside, the floors were black-veined marble. The air smelled faintly of cedar, coffee, and a colder note I could not name at first. Night air, maybe. Wool. Smoke that hadn't been earned by a cigarette. Men moved through the entryway without appearing to. Armed, silent, the particular silence of people pretending stillness while readying for violence. I hugged my elbows. A woman in her 60s came in from the back hall, wiping her hands on an apron, gray hair braided into a crown. Her face did not change when she saw me, only when she saw the blood on my hands. "Madonna," she said, "what happened?" "Not mine," I said. "Yet," Nico muttered. Mateo gave him a look. The woman came straight to me anyway. "I'm Rosa, kitchen's this way, ignore the men." "They've all got mothers and disappointments." "I heard that," Nico said. "You were meant to." Rosa led me to a pantry sink off a kitchen larger than the restaurant's pastry station, though warmer somehow. Copper pots hanging overhead, bowls stacked in disciplined rows. A loaf of bread cooling beneath a cloth, home disguised as infrastructure. I held my hands under warm water and watched the pink run down the drain. Rosa passed me soap, then a clean towel. "You hungry?" I almost said no, then my stomach answered for me. "She's hungry," Nico announced from the doorway. "I'm hungry too, but I'm in a war against carbohydrates, so if you love me at all, you'll boil an egg and whisper encouragement." Rosa squinted at him. "I'll whisper at your funeral if you keep talking." He leaned one shoulder to the frame and sighed toward the ceiling. "See, this is emotional abuse. And I face bullets for this family." Something in me loosened unexpectedly. Not safety, nothing so foolish, but the knowledge that this house had room for ordinary sounds. Mateo entered a moment later and the room changed temperature. Not literally, it only felt that way. Rosa straightened, Nico straightened. I became aware of my wet hands and the way my hair had come loose around my face in the car. "She stays in the West Wing," Mateo said. Rosa nodded once. "I don't need a wing," I said. "I need a phone. You'll have one tomorrow. I need to call my brother." Mateo's gaze shifted. "Your brother is dead." The words landed flat, not cruel, worse, factual. I swallowed. "I know that. Then you mean someone else." "I mean nobody." I wrapped the towel tighter around my fingers. "I mean I want my own life back." For the first time since the restaurant, something like weariness crossed his face. It was brief enough I could have imagined it. "Your old life sold you a seat at the table and a man who ran before dessert," he said. "Don't romanticize it." The truth in that cut harder than the insult. Rosa looked between us and wisely busied herself with plates. Mateo stepped aside so I could pass, but not far enough. As I moved by him, the back of his fingers brushed my wrist. Accidental. Barely anything. My body reacted as if he had gripped me. I hated that. He felt it. I knew he did. His shoulders tightened by one fraction, then settled again. First restraint. "Your room is upstairs," he said. "I'm not staying. Tonight you are. And tomorrow." His eyes held mine, still, black, exhausting. "The windows don't open, Sophia." It took me a second to understand what he meant. By then Nico was wincing in sympathy, as if even he thought that had been unfairly elegant. Rosa pressed a bowl of soup into my hands. "Eat before you argue. You'll do better." I wanted to say I did not take advice from kidnappers and their domestic saints. Instead, I sat at the long kitchen table, spoon in hand, while Mateo stood at the far counter reading something on his phone, light from the hanging lamps sliding over the planes of his face. I realized then that I had not once seen him hurry. I was beginning to think that was the most dangerous thing about him. When Rosa finally took me upstairs, the corridor to the West Wing was lined with old oil paintings and doors so thick they seemed built to keep history in. My room was beautiful in the way expensive captivity often must be to excuse itself. Fireplace, lake view, silk duvet, a lock on the outside. I heard it turn after Rosa left. Softly, efficiently. He had known I was thinking about running. He locked me in anyway. Chapter 3, Sugar Glass. The first thing he tasted was the lie I was living with. I woke to lake light and the feeling that I had forgotten something important. Then I saw the unfamiliar ceiling, the carved walnut wardrobe, the heavy curtains, and remembered all of it at once. For 3 seconds I stayed still under the duvet and let myself pretend I was in one of the suites above Bellini after a long catering event, too tired to go downstairs. Then I heard footsteps in the hall, men's voices, a door opening, a lock, not Bellini. Mateo's house had morning security. I got out of bed. Rosa had left clothes folded on the armchair. Jeans, cream sweater, socks, not mine, close enough in size to be unnerving. I dressed, brushed my hair with the silver-backed brush on the vanity, and went straight to the window. He had not lied. The windows were sealed. The lake beyond the glass looked hard enough to stand on. By the time I went downstairs, I had decided 3 things. First, I would not cry in front of Matteo Caruso. Second, I would not ask permission to breathe. Third, if I found a kitchen, I would use it. The last one turned out to be easiest. Rosa was already there, supervising two women unpacking produce while coffee darkened the air. I found an apron hanging off the side hook and tied it on before anyone could stop me. Rosa looked up once. "Good, peel oranges." So I did. By the time the first espresso machine hissed, I had zest under my nails and a bowl of egg whites whipped to glossy peaks. My body understood pastry even when my mind had not finished catching up to disaster. Ratios, temperature, texture, the comfort of rules that worked if you did. Rosa watched me from the stove with the shrewd patience of someone who had raised men too stubborn to call themselves hurt. "You trained where?" she asked. "At Bellini, mostly. Then a few night classes when my mother thought I was helping with inventory. She thinks pastry is beneath her. She thinks everything is." Rosa snorted softly. "Then she has had a blessedly easy life." I started on tempered chocolate discs, hands steadying as I worked. Around us the kitchen filled and thinned again in waves. Men passed the open door but did not enter. Somewhere farther down the hall I heard Italian spoken low and fast, then silence at once. He had entered that room. Even without seeing him, I knew. I was arranging candied orange peel when Nico appeared, hand over his heart like a tragic widower. "Rosa," he said, "if you respected the fragility of the human spirit, you would not be frying things in olive oil this early. It's 10:30. Exactly." "I'm vulnerable." He spotted my half-finished tray and leaned in. "Is that for everyone or only for people who haven't been emotionally mutilated by cardio?" "For nobody if you keep breathing on it," I said. He blinked, then grinned. "A miracle." "She's meaner in daylight." "I'm not mean." "No," Rosa said, "just observant." Nico pointed at the tray. "If I eat one, tell Giulia I died clean." "Dr. Ferrante?" I asked. He pressed a fist to his chest. "Please don't say her name like that. I'm doing my best." "Doing your best at what?" "Being tragically ignored by a beautiful woman with a stethoscope." "Also avoiding butter." Rosa handed him a spoon. "Here. Taste the sauce and suffer quietly." He did, made a scandalized sound of pleasure, and then muttered, "This house is a coordinated assault on my discipline." I laughed before I could stop myself. The room changed again, not all at once. One guard at the door straightened. Rosa set her ladle down. Nico swallowed too fast and nearly choked. I did not have to look. The soft metallic click came first, then Matteo's voice. "Bellandi," Nico coughed once into his fist. "Present, hungry, loyal." I turned. Matteo stood just inside the kitchen, coat off today, sleeves rolled once to the forearm. That should not have mattered. It did. The intimacy of a powerful man with bare forearms was apparently enough to make my thoughts less reliable. He looked at the trays, the sugar work cooling near the window, the bowl of ganache then at me. "You cook." "Bake," I said. His eyes lowered to my hands, to the thin sugar burns crossing two knuckles, and something unreadable moved through his expression. Rosa, traitor that she was, set a plate in front of him. One chocolate disc, one curl of orange peel. "I didn't make it for him," I said. Matteo picked it up anyway. He bit through the shell. The crack sounded sharp in the warm room. He chewed once, twice. His face stayed neutral, which told me more than praise would have. "What's inside?" he asked. "Burnt orange cream, bitter chocolate base, sugar top." "Why those?" I wiped my hands on the apron. "Because sweet by itself is childish." Nico put both hands over his heart. "She is poetry and violence. I support this." Matteo did not smile, but the corner of his mouth thought about it. Briefly. "Make more," he said to Rosa. "I said I didn't make it for you." "No," he said. "You made it because your hands don't know how to be idle when you're angry." The accuracy of that felt invasive. He stepped closer to the table, close enough that I could smell his cologne properly for the first time. Bergamot, cedar, and something colder beneath it, as if he had come in from outside even when he had not. "You wanted a phone," he said. "After breakfast, I also want answers. You'll get some." "From you?" "Yes." That should have reassured me. It didn't. He sounded like a man promising weather again. He set something on the table beside my cooling tray. A slim leather notebook. I froze. My brother Luca's recipe book. The world narrowed at the edges. "Where did you get that?" "In the false bottom of your flour bin." I stared at Rosa. She lifted both hands. "Not me." "I had your father's kitchen searched," Matteo said. I grabbed the notebook before I thought about it. The leather was worn smooth at the corners from Luca's hands, mine once. He had written inside it in cramped slanting script, recipes on the left page, meaningless numbers in the margins that I had never been able to make sense of. "It's mine." "Is it?" Matteo said. "Or did your brother leave you something without explaining what it could do to you?" My throat tightened so fast I had to look away. Luca had been dead 6 years. "Car accident," they said. "Wrong place. Wrong people." My mother had forbidden his name in public after the funeral because shame, in our house, always arrived dressed as order. I clutched the notebook to my chest. "You don't get to say his name like you knew him." A beat passed. Then Matteo said, too evenly, "No, I knew of him." Something was wrong in that answer. Not the words, the restraint. His POV, if it could have been heard, might have sounded like this. Luca Bellini's handwriting had sat in Matteo's private file for 6 years, beside Caterina's photograph, and the report he had never stopped reading. One dead girl, one dead boy, one lie in the middle. And now Luca's sister stood in his kitchen with flour on her sleeve and mercy still under her skin. He should have taken the book and left the room. Instead he stayed, because leaving felt too much like retreat. I didn't hear that. I only saw his jaw set once hard. "What do you want from it?" I asked. "The truth, and if I don't give it to you," his gaze dropped to the notebook in my hands. "You don't know what you're holding. Then tell me." A crash sounded outside, not near. Farther east, toward the drive, men shouted, "Quick, controlled." Nico was moving before the second sound came, a blunt, distant thud that shook copper pans on their hooks. Rosa crossed herself. Matteo turned his head slightly, listening. "Stay here." Gunfire cracked across the grounds. Someone was already moving against us. Chapter 4, the floor between us. The first time he touched me, it was to keep me alive. The first shot I had ever heard in real life did not sound cinematic. It sounded ugly, flat and fast and wrong. The second one sounded closer. Rosa grabbed my elbow and pulled me down behind the butcher block island just as another burst snapped through somewhere outside. Nico was already gone from the kitchen, barking into an earpiece with a kind of profanity-rich focus that somehow did not stop sounding like Nico. "South wall, you blind saints. If they breach the garden, I'm billing everyone for therapy." Matteo stayed, standing for one impossible second, head tilted as if he could hear the shape of the attack. Then a window at the far end of the service hall burst inward. The body hit the tiles before I understood it was a body. One of Matteo's men, bleeding through the shoulder. Not dead. Not yet. I rose without thinking. "Sophia," Matteo said. Too late, I was already there. The guard was trying not to choke on pain. I dropped to my knees beside him, stripped the kitchen towel off my shoulder, and pressed hard above the wound the way Luca had once shown me after I sliced my palm on a sugar thermometer. "Above, not in. Stop the flood first." The man cursed in Italian. "Good," I said, because he sounded alive enough to be angry. "Keep doing that." I looked up once. Matteo was watching me with the same expression he had worn at the restaurant. Not surprise, something more dangerous than surprise. Recognition. Then he moved. He crossed the room, hauled a steel prep table onto its side with one hand and almost no visible effort, making instant cover between us and the blown service hall. Another shot hit the frame. Splinters jumped. He crouched in front of me and took the towel from my hand without touching my skin. "Rosa, I've got him," she said, already dragging a first aid case from beneath the sink. "Take Sophia downstairs." "No," I said. Matteo looked at me once. "This isn't a request." Then stop phrasing things like one. For one heartbeat, Nico, somehow back in the doorway with a gun in his hand, seemed delighted by me. "Boss," he said, ducking as another round snapped somewhere above us, "I don't mean to add texture to a difficult morning, but she may actually be fun." "Out," Matteo said. I should have gone. Any sane person would have. Instead, I heard myself say, "If this is about the book, they came for that." Matteo's attention returned to me in full. "What do you know? Nothing certain. Not now." Another blast sounded from the terrace. The guard on the floor groaned. I flinched. Matteo reached for me then, quick and absolute, his hand closing around the back of my neck as he pulled me down just before a bullet punched through the hanging rack where I had been kneeling. Copper exploded overhead. A pot struck the tiles and rolled in a ringing arc. His palm stayed at my neck a fraction too long. Bare skin, heat, control, second restraint, he let go first. Downstairs, he said, voice lower now, more dangerous for it. Rosa practically shoved me toward the pantry door that concealed the cellar stairs. Move! I stumbled down 3 steps before stopping. Mateo, he did not turn. I need you to tell me if my father did this. That got him. He looked back over his shoulder, face cut hard by the flashing security light now strobing red down the hall. Your father doesn't have the courage. Then he was gone. The cellar smelled like flour and old stone and wine. Rosa locked the steel door behind us while I stood shaking among shelves of canned tomatoes and olive oil. My hands were sticky with someone else's blood. I hated how familiar blood was becoming. Rosa handed me a clean cloth and a bottle of water. Sit. I'm fine. Sit anyway. I sat on an overturned crate. Above us, the sounds came muffled through the floor, running feet. Short bursts of gunfire, then silence. Then one shouted order in Italian sharp enough to cut through wood. I scrubbed my hands until the skin went pink. Rosa busied herself opening bandage packets with the practical efficiency of a woman who had already survived too much to perform panic for anyone. How long have you worked for him? I asked. Since before he was boss. That startled me more than the shooting had. Mateo felt born old somehow, fully made. It unsettled me to picture him becoming. What was he like? Rosa wrapped gauze around a bottle neck just to keep her hands moving. Quieter. He seems quiet already. He used to smile with his whole face. Before what? She glanced at me. Not my story to tell. I almost pushed. Then I heard it overhead, the thin skitter of something metallic striking stone. Click, not the lighter. Something else. Rosa's face changed. Grenade. The blast hit a second later. The cellar lights flickered. Dust sifted from the beams. Instinct sent me off the crate and against the nearest wall, arms over my head. Rosa cursed in fluent, heartfelt Italian. Then the door flew inward. I screamed. Mateo filled the doorway, smoke behind him, one cuff torn, a line of blood along the side of his throat as if someone had tried to mark him and failed. It's clear, he said. I stared at the blood. He followed my eyes, touched his neck once, and looked at the red on his fingertips as if it belonged to somebody less important. You're hurt. It's nothing. It did not look like nothing. Rosa shoved past him upstairs toward the injured guard. I stayed where I was, suddenly aware of the distance between us. Small cellar. Too much air occupied by him. You asked what your father did, Mateo said. I rose slowly. Yes. He borrowed against shipments he couldn't protect. Paolo took the arrangement further and sold routes to my enemies. Your mother knew the marriage would bind the families long enough to hide the losses. The words should have hollowed me out. They did, but some ugly small part of me was relieved too. Not because I had been wrong about them, because I had not been crazy. They sold me. Yes, no softness, no apology. He would not decorate the truth to spare me. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes once hard. When I dropped them again, he was still there. Not closer, not farther. How long did you know? About the marriage? He was quiet for a beat. This afternoon, and you still came to the dinner. To stop a transaction, it didn't feel like being saved. A muscle moved once in his jaw. I know, he said. That was the first kind thing he had said to me, and it was not kind in any normal way. It was only honest. Somehow that was worse. I looked at the blood drying at his throat. Sit down, his brows lowered slightly. What? You are bleeding on the wine. Something that was almost disbelief crossed his face. Then, with a calm that felt more intimate than obedience should have, he sat on the crate Rosa had vacated. I took the clean cloth from the shelf, stepped between his knees, and dabbed carefully at the cut. He went completely still, not stiff, controlled stillness. The sort that acknowledged danger and chose not to retreat. His skin was hot under the cloth. His cologne was closer here, bergamot over cold night, and beneath it the iron scent of blood. You should have let Giulia do this, I said. Giulia isn't here yet. Then Rosa, he watched my face. You're here. My fingers faltered. Almost, I could not look at his mouth. So naturally that was all I could think about. The line of it, the silence of it, the way every room seemed arranged around what he refused to say. I cleaned the cut, taped gauze over it with hands that wanted to shake and did not. When I stepped back, his hand rose as if to catch my wrist. It stopped in midair. Third restraint. Then he lowered it and stood. Upstairs, somewhere above stone and smoke, a siren started in the distance. Mateo looked toward the ceiling, and his face changed back into the one the city feared. "This isn't over," he said. It was. Chapter 5, the Book of Measures. My brother had hidden a war inside butter and sugar. There was a difference. Left me something meant inheritance. Hid it with me meant survival. I stared at the page until the numbers stopped looking like ingredients and started looking like intent. "He didn't trust the house," I said. "No," Mateo said. "He trusted that nobody in it looked at what you loved closely enough to understand what he had hidden there. It should not have hurt. It did." My mother had spent half my life dismissing pastry as decoration. My father had treated the kitchen like a room that produced useful women and profitable dinners. Luca had understood the insult well enough to weaponize it. I turned another page. Ricotta, sugar, candied citron, then the marks in the margins, short lines, port initials. Dates disguised as oven temperatures. Mateo came around the desk and stopped at my shoulder. Not touching, never careless enough for that. His presence settled along my spine anyway. "Here," he said quietly. His finger hovered over a notation I had missed. XII/SA/white/one girl. The room went still. I looked up slowly. "That isn't cargo." "No," my hand tightened on the leather cover. "SA," I said. "St. Agnes." "Yes." "White. Charity vans," Mateo said. "Church donations. Linen, dry goods. Medical supplies." His voice had gone flatter than before. Things nobody searched closely because decent men liked believing they were still decent. And one girl. I felt him understand it at the same moment I did. Katerina, not a shipment, not an accounting irregularity. A human being reduced to a margin note in my brother's hand, because writing the truth plainly would have got him killed faster. Or maybe it had got him killed anyway. I turned another page too hard. The paper bent under my fingers. Luca's cramped writing blurred, then sharpened again. There. A second mark. C/Silver Saint moved before Don. Mateo inhaled once. Just once, but I heard it. I looked at him. Silver Saint? His gaze had fixed on the page with such stillness it frightened me more than anger would have. "My sister wore a medal," he said. "St. Catherine?" The office seemed to shrink around us. For one terrible second, I saw the truth in layers. Luca at the docks. Mateo's sister somewhere she should never have been. Bellini roots. Church vehicles. Men calling that kind of trade business. My family sitting at white tablecloth dinners while girls disappeared inside charitable inventories. I shut the book. Hard. "No," Mateo's eyes moved to mine. "No what?" "No to all of it." My voice shook now, and I hated that it did. No to this being real. No to my brother carrying this alone. No to my family. I stopped because the sentence had nowhere survivable to end. Mateo picked up the decanter from his desk, then seemed to think better of it and set it down again, untouched. When he spoke, his voice was lower, more dangerous for how controlled it remained. "If Luca documented this," he said, "then he knew where she was moved. Or who ordered it. He died 6 years ago." "Yes, you think my brother died because of your family?" His jaw tightened. "I think he died because men in both our families mistook kindness for weakness and secrecy for safety." I should have stepped back. Instead I said, "And what do you think you're doing with me?" That made him go still in a different way. "Using you," I asked. "Protecting me, punishing them through me." "Which version are you most comfortable admitting?" His eyes met mine fully. "Black, exhausting, impossible. All of them were true the night I took you from that table," he said. The honesty landed harder than any lie would have. And now, a long beat passed. Then, now I am trying very hard to keep one of them from remaining true. Something in my chest misfired. I looked away first. The saint's medal hung from the lamp beside us, dull in the amber light. I had noticed it before without understanding why it remained in a room so otherwise stripped of sentiment. "Was that hers?" I asked. He followed my gaze. "Yes, you keep it where you work. I keep it where I can see it when I'm tempted to forget what men call necessity. for the first time since he had entered my engagement dinner. Matteo Caruso sounded tired. Not weak, never that, but tired in a place power could not reach. I opened the notebook again. If Luca hid this with me, I said slowly, then he expected me to understand something eventually. He used pastry language because it was ours. There has to be a key. There is. Matteo touched the bottom margin of the page. Look. I bent closer. 3 tiny strokes beneath the recipe title. Not decoration, not Luca's usual habit. Fold, rest, laminate, not baking instructions. Locations, I felt my pulse kick harder. Bellini basement, I said. Resting room. The old lamination station next to the dry storage. For menus, for invoices. I turned another page, same marks, different order. No, not menus, documents. He left something there? Matteo was already reaching for his phone. Wait! I caught his sleeve before I thought better of it. His attention dropped to my hand. So did mine. I let go immediately. If my parents are involved, I said, they'll have cleared anything obvious. Then we search for what only your brother would think to hide. And you're taking me? I'm not leaving you here. That wasn't what I said. His lighter appeared in his hand, as if conjured by the thought. It turned once between his fingers. Click, I know. The office door opened a moment later. Tommaso Serra stepped in without being announced, tall and spare in a dark coat, his expression made of professional calm. He was older than Matteo by a few years, maybe, with the kind of face that looked honest until you realized how much effort had gone into making it unreadable. Bellini is closed for lunch service, he said. Your uncle's men have been seen near the river. Paolo's still missing. His eyes landed on me, then on the open notebook. Something flickered there. Fast enough that I might have imagined it. Good, Matteo said. We're going to Bellini. Tommaso's pause was microscopic. With her? With me, I corrected. Matteo's gaze slid to mine. Then back to Tommaso. Yes, he said. With me. And because the world had already become a place where I could tell danger by the softness of a man's voice, I knew he had just made a decision someone else in the room did not like. Chapter 6. The basement kitchen. I went home under guard and left less of myself there than I feared. Bellini looked smaller in daylight. Not physically. The building still took up its respectable corner of the block, with polished brass and cream stone, and the heavy awning my mother had once called understated wealth. But whatever dignity it had possessed no longer survived being seen through Matteo's windshield. I had loved this place once. That seemed embarrassing now. 2 black cars stopped at the curb. Nico got out first, one hand near his jacket, scanning the street with the weary expression of a man who expected bullets to inconvenience his diet. Any geese? I asked as I stepped onto the sidewalk. He blinked. You mock my suffering. I'm gathering intelligence. There are no geese, he said darkly. Only accountants. Sometimes it's worse. Despite myself, I smiled. Matteo saw it. Of course he did. He saw too much. He came around the car and placed one hand briefly at the small of my back to guide me toward the door. Not possessive, not gentle either, simply certain. He removed it almost at once. 4th restraint. Inside, the restaurant smelled like lemon polish, stale coffee, and the ghost of last night's humiliation. Chairs were upside down on the tables. Staff had been sent away. At the far end of the dining room, my mother stood beside the bar in ivory silk. As if she had dressed for a funeral she expected to host rather than attend. My father was with her. He looked older than I remembered. Smaller too. Fear had a way of shrinking men more efficiently than age. Sophia, my mother said. Thank God, I did not move toward her. The disappointment that crossed her face would have hurt me once. Now it only educated me. My father tried next. Tesoro, this has gone far enough. Did it start far enough for you? I asked. He flinched. My mother's eyes sharpened. You don't understand the pressures your father has been under. No, Matteo said from beside me. She understands them very well. That's why she's no longer impressed. My mother turned that brittle smile on him. You have made your point. No, he said. I haven't. The room felt colder with him in it. Tommaso moved off toward the back with 2 men. Nico lingered near the front window, pretending ease and radiating violence. I looked at my father. Did you know about Luca? His face changed too slowly. That was answer enough. My mother stepped in before he could speak. Luca was reckless. He was dead, I said. Those are not the same thing. He got involved in matters he should have left alone. The sheer neatness of that sentence turned something in me. I heard my own voice go quiet. What matters, Mama? Girls hidden in donation vans. Shipping schedules sold to men who kill for inconvenience. Or was I meant to wait until after the wedding to find out what kind of family asset I had become? Her nostrils flared. Watch your tone. Mateo's head turned slightly, not toward me, toward her. It was the smallest movement in the world, but my mother went white. I had never seen anyone frighten her before. We need the basement, I said. My father stared. Why? Because Luca left something there. No, my mother said immediately. The kitchen was cleaned. By whom? Staff. Then you won't mind if I look. I did not wait for permission. The basement stairs felt exactly the same under my feet. Cool stone, worn center edges. The air below still held sugar and yeast and old refrigeration. My throat tightened so fast I almost had to stop. This had been my world. Luca's too, morning lamination, burned fingertips, butter blocks softening on trays. Quiet work before the upstairs performance began. The old invoice station stood near the dry storage just where I remembered. I went to it and crouched. Fold, rest, laminate, I murmured. Mateo stood over my shoulder, while Tommaso searched the shelves and Nico wandered in late enough to announce. If someone shoots at us in a pastry basement. I'd like it formally noted that I hate the symbolism. I ignored him and ran my hands along the underside of the station. Nothing. Then I looked at the sheeter beside it. Old industrial steel. Luca used to tap it twice before rolling dough, as if machinery responded better to ritual. I never knew why, until now. I tapped twice, something clicked. I stared, Nico straightened. Well, that's disturbing. There was a narrow false panel beneath the side shelf, sealed with magnet catches. Inside lay an oilskin packet no larger than my hand. My pulse became violent. Mateo took a step closer. Open it. I did. Inside was a key, a photograph, and one folded note in Luca's handwriting. For Sophia, if Bellini is no longer safe, go where saints are named and debts are counted. My vision blurred. I picked up the photograph. Two people stood in front of a summer festival booth strung with white paper lanterns. Luca, younger, grinning. Beside him, a girl with dark hair braided over one shoulder and a silver medal at her throat. Katerina, alive, laughing, looking directly into the camera. Mateo did not speak. I looked at him. His face had become something terrible in its stillness. You knew him, I whispered. No, he said after a beat. I knew she disappeared with help I never found. I handed him the photograph. His fingers were steady when he took it. Too steady. Tommaso had gone motionless near the flower bins. Saint Agnes, I said, looking again at Luca's note. That's where the key goes. My father appeared at the bottom of the stairs then, breathing too hard. Sophia enough, I rose slowly. No, Sophia, no. The word came out clearer this time. You sold roots, you let Paolo use me, and when Luca tried to stop something worse, you buried him and called it recklessness. That is not what happened, he snapped, finally sounding like himself. Then tell me what did. He opened his mouth. My mother appeared behind him and answered instead. He chose badly, she said. Just as you are choosing badly now. Mateo's attention shifted to her with lethal calm. Leave, he said. She laughed once, brittle and unbelieving. This is still my family's business. No, he said. It was, past tense. My mother had never in her life understood when a room no longer belonged to her. She lifted her chin and looked at me instead. You think that man has rescued you? She asked. Men like him do not marry girls like you. They use them until they are finished. The silence after that was vast. Then Mateo stepped forward, photograph still in one hand. When I am finished, he said softly, your daughter will own what remains of this building, and you will be grateful I left you the memory of the front door. Even Nico did not make a sound. My mother lost color so fast I thought she might faint. I should have enjoyed it. Instead, I only felt tired. I tucked Luca's note into my coat. Let's go, I said. Mateo looked at me once, sharp and unreadable. Then he did something infinitely worse than touching me. He obeyed. Chapter 7. St. Agnes, the church kept records. So did the dead. St. Agnes sat on a rise above the river with limestone steps, winter-bare hedges, and the kind of stonework old families liked, because it made their sins feel inherited rather than chosen. We went that night, not quietly. Rafael Caruso funded half the parish renovations in this part of the city. Bellini money had paid for the rest. If Luca had hidden a key in the basement and written saints and debts, then whatever waited here had survived because no one imagined looking for evidence where donors knelt. I wore black. Not because Matteo told me to, because grief had finally found a color I could tolerate. Rosa buttoned the coat herself before I left and muttered that men made cleaner decisions when fed and properly intimidated. Nico announced he had polished his gun and his shoes in honor of the church. Giulia, arriving with her medical bag and her unimpressed eyes, told him if he got shot doing something theatrical, she would revive him only long enough to yell. Their voices followed me to the car like warmth. Matteo waited by the rear door. He looked as he always did in public, impossible to mistake, impossible to fully read. Dark overcoat, gloves. That silver lighter hidden somewhere on him like a second pulse. When I stepped close, his gaze moved once over my face. "You don't have to come inside," he said. "I know, Rafael may be there. I know. He'll use whatever hurts most." Something hard and strange settled under my ribs. "So will I said. For the first time that day, the corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. Recognition, maybe. Inside, the parish hall buzzed with donors, candles, white wine, and weaponized respectability. Gold frames, silent auction tables, women wearing pearls as if they had invented modesty, men who kissed rings and signed off on violence from leather offices 3 blocks away. They all noticed Matteo, then they noticed me on his arm. Whispers moved faster than music. At the far end of the room, Alessia Caruso stood beside a display of donated school uniforms, speaking to an older priest. She was beautiful in a way that didn't work like a knife. Softer than Matteo, though I recognized the family bones around the eyes. Widow's black suited her too well. When Matteo approached, she kissed his cheek once, then looked at me with frank curiosity and no malice. "So," she said lightly, "you are the woman causing logistical nightmares. I didn't realize I was scheduled." "You were." Her gaze flicked to Matteo. "Which is why this is interesting." I might have answered, but Nico drifted past us carrying 2 tiny canapes like a martyr. "Alessia," he said under his breath, "if there are geese on church grounds and nobody warned me, I will resign from God." "There are no geese," she said. "Then I renew my faith." Giulia, passing behind him, stole 1 canape from his hand without slowing. He looked offended and lovesick at once. It almost made me laugh. Then I saw Rafael. He stood near the side chapel doors with Paolo's mother and 2 men, whose suits fit too badly to be decorative. Older than Matteo by perhaps 20 years, silver at the temples, handsome in the cultivated way of men who mistake refinement for morality. His gaze landed on me, then on Matteo, and lingered there with intimate contempt. "So," Rafael said as we approached, "the Bellini girl." "Uncle," Matteo said. The word carried no affection. Rafael looked me over as if pricing silk. "A pity about the fiancé." "It was," I said. "He turned out to be cheaper than the flowers." His brows lifted. Matteo's attention flicked to me, brief. Dark, approving in a way I felt in my throat. Rafael laughed softly. "You do like them with teeth." "I like them alive," Matteo said. The room around us thinned. Paolo's mother found a reason to leave at once. Sensible woman, Rafael's gaze sharpened by 1 degree. "Careful, nephew." Girls from frightened houses learn to confuse the hand that cages them with the one that feeds them. My spine went cold. Before Matteo could answer, I did. "You would know," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. Rafael turned fully toward me. In his eyes, for 1 naked second, I saw it. Not surprise, memory, he knew exactly what Luca had witnessed. Exactly what Caterina had been. Matteo saw it too. I knew he did because his whole body changed without moving. The way weather changes over water. Quiet first, then fatal. "Confession is through that door," I said softly to Rafael. though from what I understand, you've always preferred accounting." He smiled then, and it was the smile of a man who had buried people under better manners than mine. "You should teach her obedience." Matteo's voice when he answered was almost gentle. "I'm trying very hard not to teach her anything about men like you." Raphael's expression cooled. "Try harder." He moved off before violence could become public, but not before I saw Tommaso near the chapel threshold, watching us with that same unreadable face. Later, when the speeches began and donors turned toward the dais, Matteo got us into the records corridor behind the sacristy, using Luca's key and a priest who went pale enough at Matteo's glance not to remember questions. The lock fit a narrow iron cabinet in the wall. Inside were old donation ledgers, baptismal files, one sealed envelope. My hands shook as I opened it, a copy of a shipping manifest, 3 pages of coded route transfers, and one note: "If I am dead, it was not an accident. Ask Doc 14. Ask Paolo. Ask why Caterina Caruso was moved under church linen." Luca Bellini underneath, in different ink, much shakier. "If Sophia finds this, don't let her father near her again." I stopped breathing. Matteo took the page from my hand with terrible care. Then footsteps sounded in the corridor. Tommaso appeared in the doorway. "Paolo S. been seen at Dock 14, he said. His eyes landed on the papers. "We have a short window." I should have trusted the urgency. Instead, something colder moved through me, because before he spoke, I had seen him coming out of the side chapel. And from where I stood, the corridor between chapel and records had only one other door, one that led to Raphael. Chapter 8, Dock 14. The man who had courted me finally told the truth, and it was uglier than rejection. Docks at night smelled like river cold, diesel, wet rope, and old lies. Dock 14 sat farther south than Bellini's legitimate routes usually ran, half abandoned except for the active berth and the warehouse lights reflecting off black water. The kind of place where men arranged disappearances and still expected invoices. Matteo did not want me there. He said so 3 times. I came anyway, because Luca's note had my name in it. Because Paolo knew why my brother was dead. Because every version of my life in which men made these decisions around me had already ended badly. We waited inside the dark warehouse office above the loading floor while Nico muttered commentary into an earpiece, and Giulia stayed back at the cars where medics could reach her faster if this went wrong. "When this is over," Nico said, checking his weapon, "I'm eating 5 cannoli and asking no one for permission." "If this goes wrong," Matteo said without looking at him, "you won't have a jaw left to chew." Nico sighed. Hostility, constant. Tommaso stood by the far window, posture loose enough to look calm, too loose to actually be it. Matteo had said almost nothing to him since St. Agnes. I had said less. But suspicion moved through the room like a smell no one admitted noticing. Then headlights cut across the yard. One car. Paolo got out alone. He looked terrible, not injured, just ruined by fear. Hair uncombed, coat buttoned wrong, eyes moving too quickly. Whatever vanity had once made him seem polished had burned off somewhere between betrayal and flight. "Stay behind me," Matteo said. "I'm not furniture." "No," he said, "you are exactly why this meeting is happening at all." I hated how much of that was true. We went down together. Paolo saw me first. That was the first real shock on his face. "Sophia." I stopped several feet away. Matteo did not. Paolo swallowed. "You shouldn't be here." I almost laughed. That is a spectacularly strange thing to say to the woman you tried to marry for access to shipping routes. His gaze flinched off mine, then back. "I know what it looked like." "What it was, you mean?" He winced. Matteo's voice cut in like wire. "Talk." Paolo licked dry lips. "Raphael used Bellini routes for years. Your uncle made my father rich. Then Bellini started bleeding money and Bruno got greedy. He wanted a stronger tie. Marriage was leverage." His eyes went to me again. "I was told if I kept you content, everything would stay smooth. I wasn't difficult enough to notice otherwise." His face twisted. Shame, maybe, or only discomfort at hearing himself plainly. "I didn't think they'd hurt you, because you never thought of me as real." He had the decency to look sick. Matteo took one step closer. "Luca." Paolo shut his eyes briefly. "Your brother found a girl in one of the St. Agnes transfers," he said. "Alive, sedated. He recognized the Caruso medal because he'd seen her once at a summer feast with Sophia." His voice snagged. "He told me he was going to the police." My ears rang. "He was 19, I whispered. "Yes, and you told them." Paolo looked at the water beyond us instead of at me. "I told Bruno first." Bruno told Lavinia. Lavinia told Raphael. The river kept moving as if nothing had happened. My throat burned so badly I could barely hear the rest. "Luca was sent out on a false delivery the next night," Paolo said. "The truck never made it back." Matteo's hands remained at his sides. That frightened me more than if he had drawn a gun. "And Caterina?" he asked. Paolo's face went gray. "Raphael moved her east, that's all I know. She was dead within the week, but not from the transfer." Something in Matteo's expression disappeared. Not humanity, he still had that. Unfortunately, what disappeared was the part of him that remembered forgiving anything at all. Then Paolo said the wrong thing. "I never meant for it to go that far." Matteo hit him, not wild, not dramatic. One short, efficient blow that dropped Paolo to his knees on the wet concrete. I flinched. Nico did not. Tommaso didn't either. Paolo spit blood and tried again from the ground. "There's more." Matteo waited. Paolo laughed once, breathless and miserable. "You still don't see it." "He's got someone inside your house." Tommaso's head came up sharply. Paolo looked around at all of us, smiling with a split lip and the stupidity of a desperate man who believed confession still purchased survival. "He loved the wrong woman," he said. "That's how Raphael got him." Everything happened at once after that. A red glint from the roofline across the yard, a crack that split the dark, and Matteo moving but too late. I saw the sightline before he did. Maybe because I had spent my life noticing danger a second before it struck, trained by tone and silence and my mother's expression. Maybe because fear had made my senses crueler. Maybe because Luca was dead and I was finished being slow. I slammed both hands into Matteo's chest. The shot broke the air where he had been standing. Glass exploded above us. Men shouted. Nico swore. Tommaso drew and fired upward. Paolo tried to crawl and got a second bullet through the throat for his trouble, his body going still so fast it looked indecent. Matteo caught me around the waist as I stumbled with him behind a steel pallet stack. His hand spanned nearly all of my side. His breath hit my temple once hard. "You saw it," he said. Yes, the warehouse had become gunfire and echo and river light. He looked down at me then with something rower than anger in his face. And because terror made honesty simpler, I said the thing I had not meant to say out loud at all. "I am not watching another person die because of my family." The sound that came from him was not quite a breath, not quite restraint either. Then he let me go and became dangerous again. By the time the shooting stopped, Paolo was dead, the sniper was gone, and every person on Matteo's side was still standing, including Tommaso, which should have reassured me. Instead, I could not stop hearing Paolo's last sentence. He loved the wrong woman. Chapter 9, The Locked Room. He showed me the wound he had mistaken for power. We got back after midnight. The house was too quiet for the amount of violence we brought into it. Men moved in low voices. Doors opened and shut. Somewhere down the east hall, Giulia was yelling at Nico to sit still while he insisted the graze to his shoulder made him look distinguished. I should have gone to my room. Instead, I followed Matteo upstairs. He knew I was behind him. Of course he did. Still, he kept walking until he reached the west corridor and stopped in front of the one door I had never seen open. The locked wing. His hand rested on the knob. "I told you once the windows didn't open," he said. I leaned against the opposite wall, suddenly too tired to pretend I wasn't shaking. "You also locked me in." "Yes. And now?" His gaze met mine. "Now I'm trying not to." Something in the air between us changed. He opened the door. The room beyond was smaller than I expected and more devastating for it. Pale wallpaper, a narrow bed. Books on a shelf, a vanity with a cracked ivory brush, curtains in faded blue, nothing grand, nothing theatrical. Just the preserved remains of a girl who had once lived inside power and still liked pretty things. Caterina's room. I stepped inside carefully, as if noise could damage what time had not. On the bedside table sat a photograph of Matteo, younger by years and severity, one arm around a dark-haired girl smiling into sun. Same braid, same metal. She was 17, he said from the doorway, soft with everyone, even people who didn't deserve it, especially them. I traced the edge of the vanity with one finger. Like a saint, a pause. She would have hated that. So do I know. I turned. He had not come farther in. It struck me then that I was standing inside the place he had protected not from others, but from himself. Why show me this? I asked. Because Paolo's dead, because Luca tried to save her. Because I've spent 6 years building a machine that prevented men from ever taking from me again, and tonight you looked at a rifle sight and moved before my own people did. His voice dropped. And because I am getting less good at pretending you are here for reasons I can control. The truth of it was so clean it left no room to hide. I crossed the room until only a few feet remained between us. What happened? I asked softly. His eyes shifted once to the metal on the dressing table, then back to me. My uncle had debts, he said. Political, criminal, personal. Katerina was leverage. I was 24 and stupid enough to believe I could fix the larger war first and then go back for her. He smiled once without humor. Control is a religion men invent after chaos has already baptized them. I did not speak. He continued anyway. By the time I understood the exchange had been real, she was gone. My uncle said mercy made men expensive. I decided he was right for a while. The room held his silence with terrible tenderness. I'm sorry, I said. He looked almost angry at that. Don't. Why? Because if you say it kindly, I might believe I deserve to hear it. The honesty in that wrecked me, so I told him the truth back. Luca used to bring me scraps of laminated dough when my mother was in one of her moods, I said. He'd stand in the doorway of the dry storage and say he needed a second opinion on butter. As if I were a consultant instead of a child hiding from dinner. I smiled, then couldn't keep it. He was the only person in that house who ever made softness feel intelligent. Matteo watched my face as if memorizing it hurt. He left the book with the right person, he said. I should have thanked him. Instead I said, you can stop keeping me by force now. His jaw shifted once. Then he reached into his jacket and handed me a folded document. I knew what it was before I opened it. The custodial agreement, voided, signed, my throat tightened. You're letting me go? Yes. Do you want me to? A long silence. No, he said it the way other men might have said prayer or defeat. The paper trembled in my hand. He still did not touch me, not when I stepped closer. Not when I set the document aside on Katerina's dresser. Not even when I lifted one hand and placed it flat against the center of his chest, right over the stubborn, violent rhythm of his heart. It was I who kissed him, because I wanted to know if his control felt as ruthless up close as it looked from across rooms. Because he had opened a locked door for me and expected nothing in return. Because the man everyone feared had just handed me freedom with a face like loss. For one suspended second, he did not move at all. Then his hand came up to my jaw with such care it made my eyes sting. Fifth restraint broke. He kissed me back like a man starving in perfect silence. No hurry, no conquest, nothing taken, every part of it chosen. When he drew back, his forehead rested briefly against mine. Little saint, he said, rougher now, tell me to stop. No. His thumb moved once under my ear, where my pulse would have betrayed me to anybody less dangerous than him. Then stay, he said. I did. Chapter 10. The traitor's love, the betrayal hurt, because it had a heartbeat, morning came cruelly bright. I woke in Matteo's bed, with the lake burning silver, beyond sealed glass, and the heavy awareness that the night before had changed something neither of us could safely pretend otherwise about. He was already awake, of course he was. One arm curved around my waist, loose enough to leave me free, firm enough that my body registered his absence before my mind did when he finally let go to answer the knock at the door. It was Tommaso. I knew from the silence that followed. Matteo dressed without wasted motion. I tied on one of his shirts and stepped into the sitting room anyway, because secrecy had done enough damage for one family and then some. Tommaso stood near the desk looking as if he had slept less than any of us. The lines around his mouth had hardened overnight. On the table lay a phone, a thin file, and a photograph turned face down. He looked at me once, then at Matteo. "You should hear it from me." "You have 1 minute," Matteo said. Tommaso nodded. "Raphael had leverage," he said, "not over me." "Over Alessia?" The room stayed still. Tommaso picked up the photograph and turned it over. Alessia, younger, holding a little boy on a summer lawn. 5, maybe 6 years old. Dark eyes. Tommaso's mouth. I understood before Matteo spoke. "Enzo," Matteo said. Tommaso's face did not change. "He's mine." The silence after that was almost holy in its cruelty. Alessia's dead husband had been a violent drunk with a famous surname and a useful last name for the family. Everyone had politely believed the boy resembled his mother. Raphael apparently had known better. "He threatened them?" Matteo asked. Tommaso nodded once. "To expose it, to take the boy. To kill him if exposure didn't hurt enough. And you chose to feed him information." "I chose to feed him scraps," Tommaso said sharply. "Nothing that should have reached the house. Old roots. Dead accounts, enough to keep him patient." "Doc 14, Matteo said. "That was not me." "Saint Agnes?" Tommaso shut his eyes briefly. "I told him you'd come sniffing around the parish," he said. "I thought he'd move his books. I didn't think he'd send a shooter into a fundraiser." Nico, leaning against the far wall with a fresh bandage on his shoulder and a breakfast pastry in his hand, muttered. "You may notice that's not the comforting distinction you think it is." Tommaso looked older all at once. "I know." Matteo had gone absolutely still. It was the same stillness he wore before deciding whether a man remained in the world. I moved before I could argue myself out of it. "Ask him the rest," I said. Both men looked at me. "If he came here to lie, he would have done it smaller," I said. "He came here because the part of him that still belongs to you is losing." Tommaso's jaw tightened. Matteo's eyes remained on mine for a beat too long. Then he said, "Finish." Tommaso exhaled once. "Raphael is meeting Bruno and Lavinia tonight at Bellini. Private dinner. He wants the original shipping books and whatever survived of Luca's notes. He thinks if he controls both, he can clean the roots, blame Paolo, and force Bellini shipping under his own holding company." "And Sofia?" Matteo asked. Tommaso's face went flat with self-disgust. "Raphael thinks if you care for her, you'll come fast and angry. He prefers you angry." Nico lifted his pastry. "He's not alone." Matteo ignored him. "Why tell me now?" he asked. Tommaso answered without hesitation. "Because Enzo can live hating me," he said. "He can't live if I keep helping that man." The truth of it struck harder than any justification would have. Love. Not greed, not ambition. Love turned cowardly under threat until it barely resembled itself at all. I thought of Paolo saying the wrong woman, not a mistress, not some melodrama, Alessia, a child. A life Tommaso had protected so badly it had become betrayal. Matteo looked at the photograph in his hand for a long time. Then he set it down. "If I kill you now," he said, "it would be for what you risked with my people. If I don't, it will be because I still remember what it is to be made weak by the wrong fear." Tommaso said nothing. At last Matteo pointed to the door. "You do not leave the grounds without my permission," he said. "You do not speak to Alessia unless I allow it. And tonight you earn the right not to be buried." Tommaso bowed his head once. "Understood." When he had gone, Nico whistled very softly. "That's what mercy looks like in this house, by the way. Terrible for everyone." He left too wisely. I turned to Matteo. "You spared him." "No," he said. "I delayed him. For love, for damage." "Same family," I said. That almost earned me a smile. Almost. Instead he crossed to me and touched the back of my neck once, thumb just beneath my hairline, where he knew my composure came apart first. "Tonight," he said quietly, "you do exactly as I say." I looked up at him. "You know I won't." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm saying it anyway." Then he bent and kissed me once, brief and fierce enough to feel like a promise sharpened on fear. Chapter 11. The empty chair again. This time he took it because I chose the room. Bellini had never looked more like a crime than it did that night. All the lights were on. Curtains drawn. White roses again, because my mother preferred consistency, even in ruin. Through the dining room windows the chandeliers glowed soft and obscene over a table laid for 8. The same room. The same polished marble. The same seat at Paolo's place left empty at the side as if absence itself had learned table manners. I entered beside Matteo, not behind him, beside. Nico and two men came through the kitchen. Tommaso, still pale with sleeplessness and consequence, took the back corridor. Giulia waited 1 block away with medics and an engine running. Rosa had kissed my cheek before I left and told me not to waste good anger on people who had never deserved gentleness. I carried that with me into the room. My parents stood at one end of the table. Lavinia Bellini glittered in dark green silk, mouth hard enough to cut. Bruno looked, as he always had when cornered, offended by the existence of consequences. Raphael sat at the head like a host in his own chapel. He smiled when he saw me. "That's an unfortunate choice of escort," he said. "No," I said. The unfortunate choice was ever believing I would stay silent. My mother made a sound. "Sophia, don't perform." I almost laughed. "Performing," I said, "is the only thing you ever taught me." Matteo drew out Paolo's old chair, the one he had taken at my engagement dinner. He sat. The scrape of wood on marble echoed through the room like judgment returned with better aim. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Raphael leaned back and folded his hands. "You came angry." "Predictable?" "No," Matteo said. "I came with witnesses." Tommaso entered from the rear and placed Luca's copied manifest on the table. Nico followed with the parish records. My father went gray at the sight of them. Raphael's eyes flicked once to Tommaso. No surprise, only contempt. "So," he said mildly, "love made a coward honest." Tommaso said nothing. Alessia did not appear, thank God. I stepped forward and laid Luca's recipe book beside the papers. "This is the original," I said. "My brother documented your roots in pastry formulas because none of you respected the kitchen enough to imagine intelligence lived there." My mother went rigid. Bruno snapped, "Luca stole company information. He recorded trafficking," I said. "There's a difference." Raphael's gaze settled on me with that same snake-bright patience. "Careful, Sophia. Morality sounds shrill in rooms financed by men with guns." I met his eyes. Then it's lucky I stopped trying to sound pretty. Matteo's lighter clicked once in the silence. Soft, metallic. A sound I now understood as his version of counting backward from violence. My father sagged into a chair. "What do you want?" I turned to him. "Not Matteo, me." "Truth," I said. Out loud, my mother recovered first. She always did. "You've become hysterical." "No," Matteo said. "She's become audible." Something in me settled into place. Bruno reached for the decanter with a shaking hand. "This helps no one. Paolo is dead. The roots can be restored. We can negotiate." Raphael looked at him as one might look at a damp stain. "There it is, the merchant soul." I spoke before Matteo could. "Did Luca die in the truck?" Bruno looked away. "Answer me." My mother did it for him. "No," she said. Her voice had gone thin with the effort of holding itself upright. "He was brought back first." The room vanished at the edges. I heard Matteo stand, but I could not look at him. "What?" I whispered. Lavinia Bellini lifted her chin. "He was given an opportunity to be sensible." My mouth filled with iron. "He refused," my mother said. "He kept saying your name. He kept saying he had hidden something where only you would ever think to look." My knees nearly went. Rage did what grief could not. It held me up. "So you killed him?" My father finally looked at me. "No," he said hoarsely. "Raphael's men took him." Raphael did not deny it. Of course he didn't. Matteo's voice when it came was almost calm. "You brought my sister through Bellini under church linen." Raphael shrugged faintly. "You speak as if I invented the world instead of merely understanding it. Girls are traded. Roots are bought. Weak sons and sentimental brothers die, and still the table is set." He smiled at me then. "You, at least, learned to dress for it." That was when Matteo moved. Not wild, never wild. He crossed the distance in 2 steps and slammed one hand flat against the table so hard the silver jumped. Raphael's men reached for weapons. So did ours. My mother screamed. "Do it," Raphael said softly, eyes on Matteo. "Become exactly what made her." Matteo's gun appeared. The room held its breath. And then I understood. This was the shape of the trap, not my abduction. Not the marriage scheme. This. Rafa wanted Matteo furious enough to kill like an animal in front of witnesses. In front of Bellini signatures and church ledgers, and all the soft pod respectability that would make the story easy to sell afterward. I moved, my hand closed around Matteo's wrist. Every eye in the room went to it. He looked at me. There was murder in his face. There was grief there too. Not for him, I said softly. Not like this. Something in his gaze fractured. Rafael smiled, wrong move. Because the smile made me see his hand sliding toward the dessert knife laid beside his plate, small, polished, absurdly elegant. He lunged for me. Tommaso shouted. My father knocked backward in his chair. My mother shrieked again, but Matteo was faster. One shot, clean. Rafael staggered once, expression gone almost childish with disbelief, then fell across the white tablecloth and roses. Silence flooded the room. Matteo lowered the gun, not wild, not ruined. Not his uncle, just exact. Tommaso disarmed the nearest man. Nico had another on the floor before the second heartbeat landed. Bruno began to shake. Lavinia sat down as if her bones had given up. I stood very still with Matteo's pulse hammering against my palm. Then I let go. My mother stared at the blood spreading through the table linens. What have you done? I turned to her. No, I said. What have you done? She had no answer. For once in her life, no answer at all. Chapter 12, the chair beside mine, no one took me this time. I stayed. 3 weeks later, Bellini reopened under a different name, not because the city had forgot. Chicago never forgot anything important. It only rearranged memory into gossip and invoices. But because the restaurant had not belonged to my parents in any moral way for years, and because Matteo kept his promises with the severity of religion. Bruno signed everything over before the lawyers even finished threatening him. Lavinia left for Florida with 2 trunks, 1 sister, and no audience. Bellini shipping was dismantled in pieces. The kitchen remained, so did I. I renamed the restaurant Luca. Rosa cried when she saw the sign and denied it with such violence that even Nico stopped teasing her for a whole hour. The pastry kitchen became mine completely. New marble table, copper pans polished to warm fire. A shelf by the window with Luca's notebook restored and rebound. The coded pages copied for evidence, and the real recipes left intact where they deserved to be. Some things had to survive as themselves to mean anything. That evening, we hosted a quiet dinner after service. Not society, not donors, not criminals pretending to be philanthropists, just ours. Rosa in navy silk and kitchen shoes, she refused to replace. Giulia with her dark hair pinned up, and her expression still professionally unimpressed, despite the fact that Nico had spent the last 20 minutes carrying chairs for her, as if hoping furniture might persuade her into affection. Alessia came within Zoe at last, and Tommaso stood on the far side of the room like a man learning what forgiveness cost in installments. Matteo arrived late. He always knew how to make an entrance feel less like theater and more like gravity. He came in through the kitchen, not the front, and paused just inside the door while the warm air hit his coat. His gaze found me instantly across the room, still impossible, still worse than handsome. This time when he looked at me, nobody in the room mistook it for ownership. They understood it for what it had become. Choice. I set down the tray in my hands and crossed to him. "You're late," I said. I was told there would be consequences. There may still be. His eyes dropped briefly to my mouth. I'm prepared to negotiate. Behind us, Nico made a scandalized noise. If anyone is negotiating in the kitchen, I'd like a pastry clause included. Giulia, without turning, handed him a plate and said, "Sit down before I medicate you recreationally." He sat. Tommaso laughed once under his breath. It felt like the room exhaled. Matteo reached into his pocket and set something on the prep table between us, his silver lighter. I looked at it, then at him. "I thought you needed that," I said. "I did. And now," his gaze held mine, "now I need less reminding." My throat tightened. There were 100 things I could have said. About Caterina. About Luca. About the night he took Paolo's chair and remade the shape of my life by force before learning how to offer me anything with an open hand. Instead, I asked the only thing that mattered. "Are the windows still locked?" A pause, then the smallest, darkest hint of a smile. No, I nodded once. Good. The dining room had one empty chair left at the long table, beside his. Rosa called us in before either of us could say anything else, which was probably for the best. We went out together under low light and the smell of rosemary chicken and fresh bread and sugar cooling in the kitchen behind us. Everyone was already seated, except for those two places. Mateo stopped beside mine. He did not pull it out, did not command, did not claim. He only rested one hand lightly on the back of the chair and looked at me with all that dangerous restraint and all the tenderness he had once mistaken for weakness. "Little saint," he said quietly. This time there was no cruelty in it at all, only wonder, only choice. I took my seat because I wanted it. Then I looked up at him and said, "Sit down, Mateo." He did. And for the first time in my life, the chair beside me was not an empty place waiting to be filled by whoever had paid the highest price. It was his, because I chose it.